It isn't often that we do a book review on this broadcast, and it's even more unusual that I highly recommend a book. But here's one you want to take a look at. It's called Back to the Futures: Crashing Dirt Bikes, Chasing Cows, and Unraveling the Mysteries of the Commodity Futures Markets. Respected ag economist Scott Irwin is the author, joining us here this weekend. Scott, would I be accurate if I called it, yes, part autobiography, part primer to the futures markets, an economic guide, a history of the futures markets? There's a lot wrapped up in your book.
Yes, I think that's a pretty accurate way to look at it, Max. I wanted to write a book that was a fun and interesting and entertaining way to learn about the markets that have been the passion of my professional life my whole adult life. And so that's what I tried to do.
You start out of the book talking about a near-death experience. You were hit by a Pepsi truck. And then throughout, you point out that you were close to the precipice on different occasions there throughout not just your early life, but throughout your education and your economic career.
Well, taking some extreme risks, I have to own that, Max. That was a clear part of my growing up, my youth on the farm out in Iowa. We were pretty wild kids, and so I used those stories as kind of market parables to help with some insights about the way the markets work. So I have had an unusual amount. I think I've used up my 9 lives.
Your description of the pit trading, the open outcry trading at LaSalle and Jackson in Chicago really rang a bell with many of us who watched that era as well. It was raucous. It was rough. These were interesting characters who occupied the pits of the Chicago Board of Trade and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange.
Absolutely. After the grain elevator, the pits in Chicago were clearly the second most important thing that attracted me to the grain markets, and they were filled with colorful characters. There was a culture, a lifestyle that I just found electric, and so did many other people, and I wanted to communicate that in parts of the book.
You talk about the risks, and you talk about the important function that the futures markets provide in laying off the risk for the producers. And yet producers, of course, as you note in your book, have hated the speculators at times, have distrusted them, have referred to them as crooks. You try to sort through that a bit, I know.
Right, that's really the heart and soul of the book, is to try to explain to people the important role that the much maligned speculators play in these markets. Without them, there wouldn't be the liquidity, the information gathering that is required to have a successful, long-lived market. Yes, sometimes they do attempt to do things like manipulation in the market that no one likes, and we have to deal with. But on net, over time, they play a positive role, and that's what I try to get across as a message.
You also talked about the terrible tragedy in the 70s of our interfering with the global grain trade, the behemoth that was created in South America in their Brazilian grain market opportunity because we stopped exports to Japan. Elaborate on that just a bit.
Well, that happened in 1973, when I was in high school, so now you know my age, the soybean market in particular was on a tear, and we were in a big inflationary time, and the Nixon administration was heavy into price controls and intervening in the markets, and so they stopped exports, something that my late father never forgave President Nixon for. And it did jumpstart the soybean production industry in Brazil, and look at where we are today, almost 50 years later.
Lest we forget, and I'm not sure you referred to this one, there's been some bipartisan idiocy here. Jimmy Carter had his own embargo with the Soviet Union trade, and that too had ramifications. Did you touch on that in your book?
I did talk a little bit about that. I didn't go into great depth, but yeah, that is a bipartisan issue for sure. And it was another example of banning exports in response to a political event, and it didn't really work. It's kind of interesting, Max. You really see this being replayed with the current Russia-Ukraine war, where we've tried to restrict exports, and it's just hard for economic embargoes to work yet politicians seem addicted to them.
It's a book that is instructional, it's educational, it is entertaining. Congratulations to you, Scott Irwin, on your book, Back to the Futures. Where's the best way to get it?
It's easy to find. It's available on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and hardback version. So just go on Kindle and search for Back to the Futures, Scott Irwin, and it'll go right to the page.
Folks will love it. We're just ahead of Father's Day and Mother's Day. It's a good gift-giving idea. Best wishes to you, Scott, for much success with your book, Back to the Futures.
Thank you very much.
Scott Irwin, respected agriculture economist at the University of Illinois. Mike.
Max, I guess whether you're a professor or a farmer, we all have those stories of the markets getting a little hairy on us.
Yeah, some people have a tendency to think of those in the futures markets as crooks, you know. They've been referred to that way by farmers, but they handle the risk, allowing farmers to lay off that risk. You would especially enjoy the book because of your Iowa roots.
I look forward to reading it.
There's more coming up next weekend here on This Week in Agribusiness. We'll update you on planting progress or lack of it, and the weather seemed to. Have a great week, a safe week. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.